Good afternoon, everyone. I don't think all of us are back yet, but latecomes will be dealt with. You can be sure of that. This is the afternoon session, and so far I think we've all really got a lot from each other that's been really interesting, and we've had a lot of lovely conversations so far, and I'm sure that this afternoon will continue to produce even more interesting and fruitful topics of discussion. So there will be the opportunity at the end to have more conversations among each other. Our first speaker for this afternoon is Shanty, who is a little bit of a legend, really, in the fact that he's set up his own museum to Richard Burton in Cornwall, which is unfortunately I haven't had the chance to get there yet, but it's a delight according to the website. Shanty is a storyteller who's had a very rich and varied career, and he brings all those experiences to his storytelling. So I don't think he's going to talk about, he's not going to give us an example of that yet, but he will be appearing as our final presenter. So Shanty, we welcome you to the front. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm talking about sort of forthcoming things I got planned for Burton. So I set up a museum 6 years ago now, really to promote Burton. He didn't have a museum, and I thought, can I do one to honour his memory? Hopefully I do. But I'm always thinking of how else what can I do that brings him to a wider audience, but also ticks my creative boxes as well, which is really important. So also getting that balance right. So I'd love to share with you some ideas I have got planned for the future. The first one is music. I love dub music. Now, you know what dub music is? Put your hands up. Right, dub. Yeah, so most of you don't. Yeah, so it's an offshoot of reggae.
Similar to prog rock.
No, no, it's a derivative of reggae.
Drum and bass.
Dub gave rise to drum and bass. Okay. So a quick dub is Jamaican. So it's like the B-side of Jamaican singles. They couldn't afford to basically pay for an A-side and B-side. So they gave the A-side to a record sound engineer. He stripped out all the vocals, added verbs, reverb, echo, and totally changed it. So that's dub. It then has transformed into techno dub and ambient dub, and ambient dub is the one I'm going for. So my plan is to, I'm going to start with one book, but go through Burton's books and make some ambient dub records from them. So dub is, especially when it comes to ambient, there's lots of space. It's absolutely perfect for spoken word. So I'm planning to start with Goa and the Blue Mountains, to have certain words or phrases that Burton uses, and my friend Jason, who does all my Burton voiceovers, will do that. But then you could, for example, he might say one word, but you can echo it. But combine that with me actually telling some of the stories or anecdotes that Burton tells in his books. But with Goa and the Blue Mountains, it's going to be Indian devotional chanting. Goa is famous for its sort of house music, the trance scene. So it's going to be elements of that as well. So old and modern. I'm going to do one, Goa, and see how that goes. And really to try and do it as a live performance, because dub is a live performing thing. That's one of my ideas, and because he's travelled all over the world, there's so many different musical genres you can do, whether it's African tribal stuff or stuff from Brazil, even Nordic or Icelandic stuff. So that's one idea. I love storytelling. I love animating. I just love it. It's very demanding and it's complex, and I just love the challenge that it offers. And the really lovely thing about animating is I can do it all myself, apart from people doing voiceovers for me. So I have total free reign of what I can do and achieve. So I've been planning several sort of Burton animations for quite a while. The first one I'm going to talk about, and if any feedback throughout what I'm saying, it's not the kind of thing where you put your hand up at the end. You can throw, because this is all ad-lib, throw anything you want back at me. So the first one is an animation, was 3 animations. It's going to be called Burton the Nile, Speak the Truth. Because I've never been happy with the way the story of Burton and Speke's relationship has been shown in books or the BBC Search for the Nile or Mountains of the Moon. But I've always tried to struggle how I can sort of get this across in a way that appeals to me. And in the end, I thought I'm going to have to do 3 different versions of it. They're both sort of going to slightly cross over each other. But the first one's going to be about speak, and to really sort of, I would say, hoist him by his own petard. Writers are way too kind to speak, in my book. Way, way too kind. I'm going to use his words totally against him. He said that he thought of looking for the source of the Nile long before he ever met Burton. Well, let's go with that. That's the truth. That's what he said. So we go with that. So he joined an expedition with Burton. Didn't tell Burton at all that I had this idea as well. Okay, so straight away you can say he was a 5th columnist. He then later on in a letter says he was the leader of the expedition. Well, let's go along with that. He was. So what happened? Well, maybe after Burton had appointed him, Speke was called back to a private meeting at the Royal Geographical Society. So Rodney said, yeah, I want you to be the secret leader. Because I want you to get all the success, okay? So whatever you do, when you get back to England, I'm going to support you. And that's what happened. You have to look at Burton, Speke's linguistic abilities. You read his books, he has these very long and detailed conversations with people. For example, Jack's talking about Berbera. There he is pinned down, about to be killed, and he has this sort of quite long, in-depth conversation with the Somali warrior. So even that was in English, and it is possible that Somalia warrior was on holiday from Oxford, went tribal again. It is possible. Barrack room, parade ground Hindustani was what basically they say Speke's ability was. Or maybe he was really good at languages, okay? But kept it hidden from Burton, okay? Because if you look at all these conversations he supposedly had, he was a really good linguist, and Burton never knew. Mm-hmm. So by using his own words, I'm sort of building up this portrait of Speke as, much, much worse than any writer has ever portrayed him before. The thing, though, that really intrigues me, and I spoke to Mary Lovell about this, and she couldn't answer it. When the whole Nile expedition, I think Burton's biggest mistake by far was when they got to Tanganyika and Speke went across the river, the lake, to try and hire a dhow from the sort of Arab slave trader, and was unsuccessful. Came back with the message was, at the end of the lake, the river flows out. Burton accepted that, without supposedly speaking to Sidi Bombay, who was the one that translated this whole thing. It's only later on when they were then hired the boats, the canoes to go up the lake, that Burton suddenly asked Sidi Bombay, or Sidi Bombay suddenly comes clean, actually no, the river flows in. So was that, Speke giving the exact opposite impression to Burton, to waste the expedition's time, resources, that he then could later on go and find the source of the Nile himself. The facts fit that option. Do I think that happened? I do actually. So that's the first part of the animation. Animation all seems like this is for kids, but the style I'm going to use is I love Victorian paper theatre shows. If you know what they are, pick a hand up. So they are really popular in Victorian times. So theatre was really popular. And publishers wanted to sort of make some money out of these theatre shows. So they sent artists into the theatre shows in the West End, and they would sort of draw the actors and the scenery, and then sort of condense the script and then sell it to people to buy. So it was like a Victorian DVD, where then you would take this sort of kit of the play you've just seen back home and sort of perform it for your friends. That is Victorian paper theatre. And I perform actual shows on this, but I actually want to, all the animations I'm talking about is actually Victorian paper theatre animated. And a bit of homework. If you want to see what it looks like, I did a sort of demo for myself a couple of years ago called Bar, Blood and Humbug. So if you go onto YouTube, you can sort of see what it looks like. And it's not good, but I can get so much better than that. That's the base level. And there is historical precedent for this. Because the very first recipient of the Founders Medal from the Royal Geographical Society, Captain Ross, actually had a paper theatre show about him. So there was an actual show about him called Captain Ross, or Adventures in the Arctic region, which then made it into a paper theatre version. So there is, a historical precedent for my plans. So the first animation, is all really about Speak. The second one is, about the two together. I'm not going to reconstruct, the trip. It's much more about, the enemies that Burton had on the wings. So we mentioned some earlier, Rigby, the Royal Geographical Society, Rigby, and it's really, how he really couldn't play the game and didn't really understand how people were really trying to, cut him out. The third one is what happened if Speak hadn't committed suicide. So I want to reconstruct that meeting in Bath to see what I think would happen. And I'm really intrigued to, if any feedback now or later on, how you think that would have played out. The storytelling in me is actually, I think that meeting would have been a complete waste of time because there's no proof one way or the other where the source of the Nile was. It would just be theoretical arguments, which neither side could win. And I'm sure Burton had the intelligence to realise this. In my animation, he actually goes to the Royal Geographical Society. That's who he attacks, not Speak. The Royal Geographical, basically saying the last expedition by Speak was a complete and utter waste of time. What did it prove? Nothing. Stanley later on, 15 years later, was the one actually provided the proof. So he would have basically attacked them. And the result was, afterwards, Sir Rodney committed suicide. Speak then got funding from the French government, as he was applying already, I think. It went off to Africa and was never seen again. And because Burton ridiculed the Royal Geographical Society, basically it imploded with the suicide of their president. And then Burton set up his own Explorers Club, is how I see it. If you've got any different other views, you let me know. But it's, I love, anything I do, I love combining fact, fiction and fantasy. And that's how I can see all those scenarios playing out. So that's that one. What else am I up to? Well, Dublin next year. I'm going to actually not talk about this one, but it's another animation, paper theatre. It's called Matcham's Masterstroke. And this is all about James Joyce and Ulysses and Captain Sir Richard Burton. I think James Joyce inserted Burton as a hidden character 16 times into Joyce's book. Joyce scholars have never discovered this, but they hear what I have to say, they'll be turning over, spitting venom. Because the really famous date in literature is the 16th of June, 1904. They say that's when Nora, his wife-to-be, took him in hand. And that's why the date of the book. That's what most people assume. Joyce never confirmed that. There are other scholars that actually say, no, that happened later in August. But that same day is the day that Burton left Zanzibar, on the 16th of June at midday. Lots of cannonades, there's a loud sending off. But in the book, Ulysses, at the same time, midday, a ship quietly comes in to Dublin Harbour. On board, we meet him much later in the book, is one of the characters that Burton is represented. He's a very odd character called A.W. Murphy, and he's a sailor who Stephen Dedalus and Bloom meet later on. This Murphy character has been to Trieste. His favourite book is Arabian Nights. They call him a diamond. Isabel called Burton a diamond. He tells stories that cannot surely be true. Sounds very much like Burton. He has 16 tattooed to his arm. Some Burton scholars say that's a sort of a badge of homosexuality. But I actually think it refers to, you said 17 Mick earlier, but I think it's 16. He did 10 Arabian Nights and 6 supplementals. Though on Wikipedia, they got it wrong. You can't believe everything you can see online. That's one of the characters. So there are lots of others. So I'll leave it at that. You might hear more about that in Dublin. Plus, I'll try and animate a bit as well. So I love, as well as the museum, I do a Burton lecture. I do a Kama Sutra show. Are you up for it? A Kama Sutra show, are you up for it? I do tell people in publicity there is no audience participation, but I've taken the Kama Sutra, and yeah, it's something is quite risque, shall we say, because if you're doing a Burton thing, you've got to do it properly. You can't, censor it at all. That Burton would be not happy at all. And I do Arabian Nights, which is actually something that is even more sexually explicit, with the footnotes, which I think was someone doing the footnotes last year in Tunisia? Yeah, some people know about how sexually explicit some of them are. But I want to carry on and doing stuff, so I love his collection of stories. So a bit later on, you'll hear a bit more about El Pentamarone. So I want to do that as a storytelling show as well. So very much like my Arabian Nights, it really is sort of history of the book, how it came to be, how Burton came to translate it, some of the stories themselves, and its sort of influences today. So the Pentamarone, Vikram and the Vampire, again, which was a really, really cool book. And Pilpow's Fables, which is the last book Burton had published. It was in 1997. This guy found the manuscript in Huntington Library, and they got permission to publish it. So those are three very similar sort of collections of stories, which I absolutely love. I want to do one, The Book of the Sword. We were talking about this earlier, of really little elements of sword history, because that's really not my expertise at all. But combine that with Burton's sort of love of swords and fencing, but also combine that with stories of swords. And you think of Excalibur, you think of Tristram's sword at the chip on, which was actually, we didn't actually see it at the coronation. It was all Penny Morgan holding that one sword, but there are actually 5 other sword bearers, and one of them was Tristram's sword that has a little chip in. So it's stories like that, which I absolutely love. Another one I want to do is the working title is Squaring the Circle, which is Burton's 4 books of collections of stories. They're all framing stories, so there's a reason why these stories are being told. So for Arabian Nights, it's Scheherazade telling stories every night to her new husband to stay alive. So we'll start with Pilpow's Fables, which is the simplest framing story, where this king has 5 unruly sons, and he gets sort of a tutor, basically, to tell his sons stories. So the tutor sits down, and the first story he starts to tell is the framing story of the Arabian Nights, of Scheherazade. And then when Scheherazade basically tells her first story, that's the framing story of Vikram and the Vampire. And the very first story that appears in that collection is Pilpow's Fables. So it's like it's going round and round with these framing stories. So you never actually hear any of the stories, it's just the framing stories. And they are, in themselves, really, really nice, especially Vikram and the Vampire and El Pentamarone. I really like a lot. Right, what else have we got here? The Life of Captain Sir Richard Francis Burton in animation. This is a big one. I don't know if any of you have ever read or picked up a copy of the book that Burton was reading the night he died. It's called The Martyrdom of Madeline. And Isabel had just finished reading it, gave it to Burton to read. And I've only read the first chapter, or the prologue, and it's this girl running through the streets of London, sort of giving off all her things, giving her jewellery away, her sort of clothes away, because you get the impression she's about to commit suicide, to jump off the London Bridge. So there's Burton reading this, and his mind suddenly wanders back to another suicide, and his heart starts to pound. So it's really half based on his last night, the heart attacks, the sort of the electric shock. So every time he gets that, he sort of jumps back into another memory he has. But interspersed with his first non-family biographer, which is Thomas Wright. So it's like Thomas Wright interviewing people for his book, but interspersed with Burton's last night as he has these memories. So it's all sort of interconnected and intertwined. I just love that sort of combining 2 things together, shall we say. Right, well, I'll just say one more thing. So I mentioned this very first meeting I came to, which is another massive project. When I get into these projects, I really get into them. I send my wife crazy because she never sees me. I'm always in my studio working on animations. But it's called St. Ives, A User's Manual, which is a take on, I don't know if any of you read the Life User's Manual. It sounds like a self-help book, but it's a really, really cool book by a French author, Georges Perec, who was an Oulipian. And Oulipians were a sort of French literary group. And Perec's probably most famous for a book he wrote called Avoid, which is, he wrote the whole novel in French without the letter E, which then translated into English without the letter E. Well, Life at User's Manual is very similar. It's about a block of flats in Paris where you're taken around from room to room, like this 100-room apartment block, but moving like a chess piece. So you go 2 along and 1 down. You can read the book and not know this. It's all very clever. But it's a series of films set in St Ives. And Burton appears in the second one. What it is, he's down in St Ives in 1888, his last visit to the UK. He's invited down to St Ives to stay at the Vienna Castle Hotel by a good old friend of his, Sir Henry Irvine, who was the first actor ever knighted who actually grew up in St Ives. So he's there. We got Sir Henry Irvine, we got Burton, we got Sir Henry Irvine's business agent, which is Bram Stoker, and we got the painter Frederick Leighton. Lord Frederick Leighton. So they're all down there together with the wives and girlfriends. They have an evening meal. Afterwards, the men go into the smoking room to smoke some opium that Burton's brought from Trieste. The ladies go into the reading room. And as they walk into the reading room, amongst them is Ellen Terry, who was the partner of Sir Henry Irvine. And she discovers this toy theatre in the corner. Now, she growing up, she loved toy theatres. So she says to the other wags, sorry to use that term, but let's put on a show for the men. And Isabel says, well, what's it going to be about? Well, what does your husband want most? And Isabel will say, well, he wants one last adventure. Then let's give it to him. So it's very detailed, but the little bit I'm going to say is basically, whatever you see after that is actually the women putting on the show for the men, but you don't realise that until much, much later. The men, they have their opium, they decide to head down into St Ives. A lot of the stuff I do, I mix the history of St Ives with this story. The circus are in town, and the circus animals, which did happen, they get split up, and the group of friends sort of get split up as well. And Burton finds himself outside a pub. Now the pub is called the Three Ferrets, but it first came a licensed premises. It was called the Bedouin Club. And Burton makes a beeline for the Bedouin Club, obviously, goes inside, and it's like a normal pub as you walk in, but as you go further and further, it becomes more and more Oriental, more and more sort of Arabic. And eventually, after going through a few scenes, he finds himself, how long have I got? 2 minutes, yeah. He finds himself in the sort of the grounds hall of the Caliph of Damascus. Because remember, they're all off their tits on opium. And he then gets involved in an Arabian Nights story, which is a really lovely one. It's called The City of Brass. And Burton basically becomes one of the characters. He takes the role of Son of the Lion, which was his sort of Bedouin title, as sent on this adventure by the Caliph, along with 4 Abyssinian princes. One of those, well, they're all in disguise. We're talking about Virginia Woolf. I don't know, you know the story. But Virginia Woolf and House of Bloomsbury friends, 4 of them dressed up as Abyssinian princes, basically to glag their way onto HMS Dreadnought, and they got away with it. And she used to holiday a lot in St Ives. So Burton, and the Caliph loves it. He's got the lion and the wolf on his trip. And basically they find the City of Brass, and there they find 10 virgins. And every time one of the members of this group see these virgins, they sort of fall on the wall and kill themselves. And so eventually, Burton, citing the Quran, goes up, sees the virgins, and then sort of overcomes them. But this then is combined later on with every 5 years in St Ives we have a ceremony. It involves 10 virgins of the town, and they wear white, and they have to be the daughters of miners or fishermen. So all these stories are going to be weaved together in the most bizarre way. And I'll leave it at that. So any feedback on anything I've said, ideas you do like or don't like, especially the Burton Speaks stuff, because it's, and I want to speak to you about Virginia Woolf's death, or suicide actually, but we'll do that privately. I'm not sure, I might be pushing the line a bit in what I do, but yeah, those are the kind of things I love to get up to really try and introduce Burton to a wider audience, but at the same time doing exactly what I love. Thank you.